Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tea and a Talk. I'm going to be your host for today's panel discussion. Thank you guys so much for joining us. This is actually the first time since the pandemic began that I have been nervous to take part in a panel discussion. And it's just because I'm surrounded by some of the greatest people in the industry. So I'm really excited to introduce you to them. I've been shouting about them on social media, and I can't wait for all of you to join this discussion. It's going to be fun. Leave all your inhibitions behind because we're here to tackle everything down to the nitty gritties. Of course, this is our World Festival, and it has been a wonderful couple of days. I hope you guys have had an opportunity to dabble in some of the other panels that have been happening. I know some wonderful conversations were had. I've seen such wonderful responses from you guys on social media. So just as a reminder, the hashtag for the festival is Our World Festival, hashtag Our World Festival. Please be sure to use the hashtag and to tag amaka.studio. So at amaka.studio. And you guys can stand a chance to win. Are you ready? An iPad. Oh my gosh, I wish I was great. I wish I was taking part in this competition because I could use an iPad. I could use an iPad right now. But there's going to be giveaways as an iPad, and there's lots of wonderful prizes to be given away from a lot of people, Black and African creators who are just making like great brands for you guys. So please be sure to use the hashtag and be sure to tag at amaka.studio. Okay, and as we continue, I just want to remind you that this whole festival is brought to you by Vista Bank. And yeah, I think we're just going to get into it. Like we've done all of the house rules. If you want to go to the bathroom, it's to the left or the right. I'm not sure. But I'm your host, Kaz, here for Tea and a Talk. I am from Kenya. I'm a sex educator. And the reason that I got into what I do is because there is no comprehensive sexuality education happening in my country. And I find that there's a lot of things that young women, young girls, the queer community I feel like without the education backing, there's so many mistakes that are happening in sexual relationships and within the sexual health spectrum. And so I feel like this panel discussion in itself is one of the reasons that I got into the work that I'm doing. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to all of our panelists. I'm gonna start with, let's see, Noor. I want to start with you. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, where you're from, where you are, and what your pronouns are.
Thank you, Kaz. I'm super honored to be part of this panel with such amazing women. My name is Noor Imam. I'm from Cairo, Egypt. Currently talking from my living room. It's sunset and we're during Ramadan, so I just broke my fast. So apologies if I'm a bit slow because I'm just trying to rehydrate. I'm a doula and a sex educator. I founded a platform on Instagram and TikTok called This is Mother Being, where we tackle all issues or topics related to reproductive and sexual health education in Arabic for people living in the Arab region, MENA region, and diaspora, or basically anyone who speaks Arabic. And similar to what Kaz was just saying, it came from a need because there is no comprehensive sexual or sex education in Egypt or in the MENA region for that matter. And that results in a lot of issues that we see on a larger scale within the country. And so I started to take matters into my own hands and teach people via easy social media content, but also we offer classes, fully digital, online, on pleasure, on periods, birth preparation. So I'm kind of wearing all the different hats. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for that. Those are very beautiful hats, by the way. I'm going to move to you, Avian. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, where you're from, where you are, and what your pronouns are. Noor, did we talk about your pronouns?
My pronouns are she, her.
Thank you. Avian?
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Evian Whitney. I am a sexuality doula and a sex educator. And I also got into this work from a place of wanting to give myself the comprehensive sex education that I didn't receive when I was growing up, and also the sex education that I wasn't seeing at the time. I've been doing this for about 10 years now, and people are often really like floored when they hear this, but like even 10 years ago, the amount of sex education we have right now was just like not in existence. There just wasn't a lot of people talking about it. There wasn't a lot of channels that people were going through in order to like we didn't have Instagram and stuff like that. So I started my work from this place of just really wanting to educate myself, and through educating myself, hopefully help transform and liberate other people's lives. My pronouns are they and she. I am a non-binary person. I am actually from Los Angeles. Well, let me pull back. I'm from the Los Angeles area, and I am in Los Angeles right now. I just moved back home a year ago, so I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm actually such a big fan. I've been following your work for a really long time. I listen to your podcast and everything.
Oh,
So I'm
thank you.
really, yeah, it's great for me to like have this communication with you right now.
I'm
Thank you
so
for being a
happy to be
part of
here
the
with you.
panel. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Penda, my love. Penda and I actually know each other because we've never met in person, but we were introduced to each other a couple of years ago over a phone call, I think, in New York.
Yeah.
And then we've worked together and collaborated on podcasts and so on. Penda, please tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, where you are, what your pronouns are.
Yes, thank you, Kaz. I'm so grateful to be here with everyone on this stage. I admire tremendously. My name is Penda Jai. I am Senegalese American. I'm originally from Denver, Colorado. Currently, I am living in Dakar, Senegal. So I am based now between Brooklyn and Senegal, which is really special because the majority of my work now is really concentrated on decolonizing sexuality. So it's so beautiful to be able to be on the continent while I'm doing this work and returning to the indigenous and African sexual identities that I think we should all draw from and have inspiration from. So I'm really, really inspired by that work. And that's what I'm currently working on. And I created the brand Proho after my mom gave me my first vibrator for Christmas. And she said that she wished she would have spoken to her kids about sex at a much younger age. And that really, created this drive in me to explore how I learned about sex, which was usually through porn and through the media and all of these, mediocre partners, to say the least. So I really started thinking about community and having open salons and forums in Brooklyn for Black people and people of color to really explore the root of their sexuality and sexual identities. And my pronouns are she, her.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. We actually do have one more panelist who will be joining us a little bit later. So please stay tuned for that. As soon as they're able to come and join our little panel discussion, I will allow them a moment to introduce themselves and answer the who, why, where, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I think let's just jump in, right? The water's warm. Okay, so the first question I actually want to direct to between Evian and Noor. I'm really curious. A lot of people want to know more about like what being a doula is and what the different variations of the work that you do really entail. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Who wants to go first? Evian?
Okay. Sure, I'll go first. So when I call myself a sexuality doula, I mean that in a sense of, I think people imagine because they're familiar with doula work as being, you're in the room helping someone give birth, or you're in the room helping someone with any trials and tribulations or questions that they have after birth. I think people imagine like, oh, I'm in the room when people are having sex, which is not the case. I would be honored if that were the case, but that's not what I do. I particularly like the word doula because the way that I understand it is that it helps. Being a doula is a job title, a position, a facilitation method that helps folks transition through one stage to the next. So I think about birth doulas as a really great example that I think a lot of people are familiar with. There's also death doulas that I'm familiar with. I've also heard of abortion doulas. And so in the way that I practice being a sexuality doula, my work is to help people transition from a place of sexual disconnection, disembodiment, confusion, maybe a little ignorance about their sexuality, their identity, the connection that they have or the relationship that they have with their bodies. I transition them out of that and into a form of sexual liberation, sexual healing, sexual empowerment, whatever that looks like for them. And basically the work that I do is more so, I feel very much like I'm a guide and I'm a facilitator. I'm not so much, I mean, there are educational pieces to it. There are coaching pieces of it, but a lot of the work that I do is pulled from my lifelong experience of diving deep into my own experiences and stories of trauma and healing. So I pull from those, as well as, I feel my ancestors in the room with me a lot when I'm doing this work. And then thinking about how the word doula, the etymology of that word is slave girl or slave woman. I feel a close connection and a close kinship to that word in particular, because I know that my ancestors did this work and that they weren't accredited, they didn't study books or whatever, like they were thrown into the fire. And so that's kind of my interpretation of how I do the work. And I would love to hear what Noor has to say about that too.
So I actually had never heard about a sexuality doula. So when I read your bio, I was like, I need to find out what this is, because it was new to me, but it's so interesting. And it kind of really makes sense. Like, it's, of course, like if you can support people through birth and pregnancy and abortions and death, of course you can support people through their sexual journey or rediscovering their sexuality, for sure. In my case, I'm a full spectrum doula. So full spectrum meaning I support people through their fertility journey, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. So maybe people would come to me wanting to try and conceive. I can help them figure out like what their cycle means, how to navigate their cycle, how to optimize the time for having sex at the right time for conceiving. But I also help people who are going through IVF, for instance, supporting them through that journey as well, because that's a completely different ballgame. But my most common work is supporting pregnant people and birthing people, which has been fantastic. Honestly, like it was one of my dreams as a little girl. Like I used to like pretend that I was pregnant since I was like 3. Like I'd stuff pillows down my shirt and like walk around with a pregnant belly. So and my family's not really like I don't come from a family of doctors. So when I like kind of dabbled with the idea of going into like becoming an OBGYN, they were like, absolutely no way. Like you're gonna waste your life. And so this was kind of like a sweet spot where I was like, oh, I could support birthing people in the birth space, be there, do the heart work with them, but I don't need to be responsible for the medical side of things, which has been wonderful. I feel so honored to have been chosen by so many families to support them, but it is also a really tasking job. It's very very emotional work. It's not just in and out. You're, apart from the time that you spend with the people you support, you're also putting a lot of emotion into that, because in my case, at least, it's always a birth. You know, you're worried for the birthing person. You're worried for the baby. You want everything to turn out to be okay. If there are any complications, you take on that responsibility somehow, and it carries on with you if something doesn't go according to plan. So it is a very tough job. I honestly don't know how long I'll be doing this full time, because it's so. I'm a mom of a 2.5-year-old, so it's also, that's a whole other dynamic. But yeah, it's been amazing. I hope that answered your question, Kaz.
Absolutely did.
Yeah.
And I noticed that that the common denominator between both of your answers is that it's a lot of energy work, and sometimes it's really hard to drop the like you don't know where the buck stops, like where the energy transfer ends, and self care. I'm pretty sure is such a huge part of the work that you do, and if you don't prioritize that, then even your clients are not getting the best version of you. Thank you so much for answering. Before we move on to our next questions, we do have Oloni who is going to be joining us. Yay! Hi there, Oloni.
Hey, hi.
How are you today? Good,
Everyone.
thank you.
Amazing.
So really quickly, before we continue with our questions for our panelists, could you quickly just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from and where you are right now, and then what your pronouns are.
Hi guys, so she, her for me. I'm based in the UK, London, as you can probably tell by my accent. I am a sex and relationships content creator. So that means that I basically just talk about sex for fun as well as educating, mostly for women. My platform that I've built is dedicated to, I would say Black women, and that's because we never ever had that space where we could talk about sexuality freely and without shame. So yeah, that's what I do and that's who I am.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the next question I'm going to pose to all of the panelists, but then also if there's anybody in the audience who would like to throw in like what your experience is, please do let us know. This is a question for vagina owners or people who have periods or menstruate. What is your go-to product during that time of the month and why?
Ooh, so that time of the month. Ooh, literally on my first day, to be honest, literally. I woke up this morning like, oh my God. Luckily for me, I've got, well, my sister who's a doctor, so she's always given me tips on what to do. But my mum has always, she's always told me to take evening primrose. So that's something I'm supposed to take every single day. You take it every single day. By the time your period comes, you know, I get very intense pains, like awful pains. And even today in my group chat, my mum was just like, did you take evening primrose? And I was like, I haven't. But but when I do take it, you know, mum knows best. So it does have an effect and it does reduce pain. Actually, it takes away all my pain. I'm just very stubborn and need to get into the habit of taking it every single day. So yeah.
But what are some of the products that you use? Are you a tampon, menstrual cup,
oh my God,
reusable pad?
Actual products.
Yeah.
I'm a mix, so it depends. When I'm going to bed, I'm definitely a sanitary towel type of girl. Every day, it'd be tampons for me, yeah.
Penda?
I am a menstrual cup all the way, never going back to tampons. And I also am a big period panties kind of girl, especially like overnight in the first couple of nights, it's really heavy. I just like that. Sorry, my chat's going off. I just love the protection of just sleeping and not waking up in a panic that I have bled all over my white sheets. So that is like such a comfort and allows me to just get a deep night's sleep during the heavier days of my period.
Thank you for sharing. Noor?
Yeah, so similar to Penda, I've converted to reusable menstrual products. Like I do a combination between menstrual cups and a period underwear. But I did realize that during my first 2 days, I prefer to bleed out. I like to flow. So that's when I would tend to use period underwear. And then the remaining days I'd switch to cups. If I'm out, then maybe, yeah, a cup is great. But I'm still experimenting with the right type of cup for me.
Oh, thank you for that. And finally, by the way, guys, please feel free to write in the comments if there's something that you want to throw out there. If you have different methods that you use, I'm so happy to hear from it. Avian, tell us about you.
I will also join the menstrual cup gang. I started wearing a menstrual cup, gosh, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, literally never going back. It's like the best. I'm like, why haven't I done this? before. So yeah, I use a menstrual cup, reusable, love that. And then I also have period underwear because I just, want to make sure that everything's going well. And sometimes leakage can happen, and there's nothing worse than feeling like you're going to bleed through your mattress. So I like to wear those when I'm sleeping. But the one tip that I want to give everyone, because I hear a lot of people who are like, menstrual cups, I tried it. It didn't work for me. Like I leaked all over the place, or it gave me so much pain. Like it just did not work. Try different menstrual cups because every uterus is different. My uterus is slightly tipped. So that means that certain period or certain menstrual cups that I've tried have been too long and actually can create a lot more period pain. I actually figured that out like a year ago. I was using just a regular, pretty popular in the States, it's called a Diva cup. And I was like, God, why are my cramps debilitating as soon as I put in this cup? And I realized it was the suction of the cup was putting too much pressure on the opening of my uterus, on my cervix. So I got a shorter cup, and that it was magic. So I understand that people are like, oh, I tried a menstrual cup and it did not work for me. Just know that there are so many different sizes, so many different widths that you can try. And unfortunately you might have to test a few, but yeah, not every uterus is made the same.
Thanks for that. I'm actually one of those people. So I've been trying to use the menstrual cup for so many years. And every time a period comes around and I have the energy to put things inside my vagina again, I'm just like, this is it. This is going to be it. And I've tried different sizes, different brands, different, what would you call it? Malleability. And it's just my vagina is just yeah, no, thanks. We're going to miss that. Mark me absent in that class. But you did mention something about different people having different facing uteruses. Is there a way that perhaps you can tell some of our people who are tuning in how to check? How do you know which way your uterus is facing?
I mean, you're just going to have to get in there and feel around. I mean, the reason why I knew is because I took a workshop, which was pretty radical, where people with vaginas were given speculums, and we all put speculums inside of us. And we had just a cervix viewing party where a doula actually was walking around being like, oh, this is what your cervix looks like. And this is the opening, and this is how you can tell. So we were really guided in that workshop to be able to know okay, this is how you stick a finger in, this is what you're looking for. I think the best way to figure that out is obviously if you have a speculum, that would be great. Just putting one in, taking a mirror, looking between your legs, and you'll be able to see your cervix. You can also feel around in there if that's something you're comfortable with. The other thing that you can do, if that's not really your jam, because I get it, it's kind of a weird thing to do, but you can always ask your gyno or your doctor whenever they're giving an exam, maybe you're getting a pap smear, you can just ask hey, can I see my cervix? Or can I, if you have the speculum already inside of you, you can ask to see it, which I think some people don't realize is an option. But they are, I'm sure they would be pretty open to you seeing this part of yourself that doesn't get more, or doesn't get a lot of airtime from you. So yeah, I'd be curious if anyone else has any tips on that, maybe Noor as well.
I see Penda has unmuted. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was just going to add that in a lot of the work that I'm doing also in decolonizing sexuality and reproductive health, I think for people who are non-white, it's also important to remember that a lot of our images of pelvises for reproductive health, et cetera, are all based on a lot of Eurocentric designs of anatomy. So it's always important to think and remind yourself that just because you see a pelvis looking one way doesn't mean that yours looks that way. Similar to what Evian's saying, a lot of it is trial and error. And I think the speculum and your OBGYN is a great way to go, but obviously becoming comfortable with your own shape and body and not being discouraged if you realize that it doesn't look exactly what you've seen in textbooks or as your OBGYN says, because as we know, for a lot of Black women, healthcare hasn't always been great to us. So always, get more than one opinion and just trust, I think, your body and yourself as much as you can.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that I think there is a difference between being able to tell, because Kaz, you were asking could you tell if your uterus is in a different position? You can't tell if your uterus is tilted backwards or forwards. You can check yourself to know whether you have like a posterior cervix or one that's looking outward. So the cervix is the end, the bottom part of your uterus, and it's either looking towards your back or it could be looking towards the front. But that can also shift depending on where you're at in your cycle as well. Same as with birth as well. It shifts from backwards to forwards. But the best thing to do is, like, if you don't have access to a speculum, because I personally don't, maybe just like squat in the shower and take it slow, use a lubricant, and try to get your finger in there, and you're feeling for something that feels like a donut, basically. So it's like this round thing with like a little hole in the middle. Try not to poke in too much. It will be painful if you try and go past that hole, but it kind of feels like a donut. And that's your cervix.
Yeah, I heard
Thank
that
you.
like you know when you've hit the cervix, when it feels like sort of like the tip of your nose. It's like firm but also a little squishy. So that's another hint.
So
or tip.
you'll find, depending on where you're at the cycle, if you're in a not so fertile phase in your cycle, it will feel like the tip of your nose, but it will start to shift to your chin. The closer you get to ovulation, it'll feel soft, and by the time you're ovulating, it'll be as soft as your lips. So you might not
I didn't know
be able
that.
to, yeah. So it changes
That's cool.
the texture and the openness of the hole. It opens wider as you approach ovulation. And that's how
bodies
you
are
check it.
crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I am
Crazy.
here for
That's
the
amazing.
learning.
That's so cool.
I am here for the learning. I love it. Thank you so much for that, Noor. And Penda, you did mention something about decolonization and decolonizing our sexualities. And I believe all of us have, that's another thing that we all have in common. The work that we're doing is trying to like regain our confidence in our bodies and our sexual health. And it does begin with decolonizing ourselves and all of the things we've taught and all of the things that we've been shown growing up. I just want to hear a little bit about your work and your journeys with the decolonization of sexuality and sexual health, especially from like an African and Black perspective or person of color perspective. Olani, do you want to go first?
Sorry there. So I think for me, I feel like for so long, it's always been, I feel like the conversation when it comes to just sexuality has always been from, especially when it comes to women, has always been from a white woman's point of view. It's never really taken us through the journey of like what it means for Black, or I would say Caribbean and African women, especially first gen in the UK. I've never really seen that being spoken on, or conversations being had, and I'm guessing that's probably due to religion and culture as well. And I just feel like there is just so much that we have to unlearn when it comes to sex, just as women, because I feel like for so long it has been, I would say, male focused as well. Even if we look at theories, when we talk about theories, I don't know if you have spoken about them, but we're talking about theories such as like Freud, the way he described our orgasms, like what it meant for us to climax, how he described what stimulation was like for us. These are things that we are actually still unlearning. This is why when we talk about, I don't know, like the disparity in the orgasm gap, the reason why we have that orgasm gap is just simply because we're still unlearning what pleasure looks like. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. But yeah.
Thank you. Hysteria is what they'd call it, which is...
Yeah, hysteria, exactly. I think he described, I think Freud described, I think it was clitoral stimulation as, I think more or less like childish. Like if it was clitoral, it meant that you weren't an adult or and whatnot. So many theories that we still have to debunk as well, because they're just simply not true.
Yes, absolutely. I really like the idea of debunking myths every time there's a topic that I start to talk about on my social media platforms, people are always just like so shocked that these things even exist. And it's so beautiful to watch people sort of like unravel into the, oh, you mean you feel this too? Oh, you mean I can do this? It's like, yes, unlearn. Does anyone else want to add anything about decolonizing sexuality?
I'll
Go on,
add
Penda.
a little bit. Yeah, I think the way that I try to approach it is saying that we like elevate instead of assimilate. And so what I'm speaking of is about elevating the sexualities and practices and identities of our ancestors and of indigenous people. And you see it's such a fascinating actually like thing and concept because a lot of our history has been erased because of colonialization. So it's like we don't even really have the text or like any resources to even go back and understand what those sexualities were. And so I think that part of the process of decolonizing our minds when it comes to sexuality is really listening to other Black and African and Indigenous people about sexuality and using them as sources, because I feel like just only reading about African sexuality via white people is the same as opening your textbook and seeing just seeing like people not perceived the same way in textbooks and in schools when you're growing up and not seeing yourself in textbooks and in history. I think it's really important to always consider Black sources. But for me, I think that we are in modern times where we think that, you know, we are being progressive and modern about sexualities. And we think that we're so incredible because now we're all encompassing and we accept queer identities and queer sexualities. But in truth, our ancestors and Indigenous people, and you can see Two-Spirit and certain Native American tribes, that we have been for a long time personifying these sexualities. So for me, I think it's about elevating those sexualities and finding those sexualities in order to validate our experiences today. I think if we learned about that more, we would feel so much more enamored with ourselves and our expression and not feel like we're kind of living in this binary spectrum of sexuality and gender, because I feel like it's not rigid. Sexuality is not rigid. And I think it's about, instead of assimilating to what we've been taught, it's really about unlearning that. But I don't think there's one solution. There's not an easy fix. I think it's really about like continuously listening to your pleasure, understanding what feels good for you, even if it's not what you've been told. And I think for me, that's the most difficult thing, is a lot of times like you're doing something that feels incredible, but you have to tell your mind like it's okay to feel this incredible. That makes sense if it doesn't look like what you've been told sex should look like. So I think it's understanding that you deserve that pleasure, and then also understanding that it will be difficult as Black people or as non-white people to walk in this world that is specifically set up to not to not nurture and cater to your pleasure. So I think we're constantly kind of in this imbalance of like, even if you do embody your pleasure, how do you then walk out into the world and stand firmly in that?
Thank you, Panda. And this actually brings me to my next question. How do you define pleasure? Noor, do you want to start?
Say when I finish. But
okay, go on.
But in all realness, I think I define pleasure as, I mean, pleasure feels like many things. It can be the satisfaction. It can just be, it's sad to say as well that pleasure, especially for heterosexual women, can also just include, you know, a man listening and understanding your body. That in itself is pleasure, because before we get to the finish line, there has to be something that takes us there. And I know that some assume that pleasure just means, you know, when you reach an orgasm, but there is pleasure along the way as well. So I would define pleasure as something that honestly really does spark the dopamine out of me. That's what I would describe pleasure as.
Thanks for that, Oloni. Does anyone, Noor, go for it?
Yeah, sure. So I've been playing around with the concept of pleasure so that I am more, I want to say, connected to my body. So pleasure for me, yes, part of it is sexual. Part of it is reaching, like, or having a really nice orgasm, maybe a few more. But also, like, pleasure can be a good stretch. And feeling good in the muscles when you stretch your body, or like being a really nice meal that you eat very slowly and you enjoy. And I think these are the things that when I try, honestly, I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to say that I do this all the time, because I am a working mom of a toddler. So it's really hard to like slow down. But when you stop and you start doing that in your day to day, I think that will definitely pour into your sex life as well, and your relationship with your body when it comes to connecting sexually with yourself or with your partner. So yeah, for me, pleasure is really feeling whatever feels good inside your body, regardless of whether it's sexual or not, because somehow it's all sexual. And that's the thing. Like sometimes we taste like a fork of really good chocolate cake, and we describe it as orgasmic. So it is sexual. Like a really good piece of chocolate cake is sexual. It's amazing. And that's the thing. Like living that pleasure in your day to day is how I'm trying to define pleasure for myself as well recently.
Thank you for saying that. And I like that you said that that it is eventually sexual. It is a sexual pleasure, even just like eating food. And the reason that resonates so well with me is because the word sexual has been bastardized over the years. And so every time people try to think of something giving you sexual pleasure that is not necessarily considered sexual, me hearing you say it, the Kenyan-born little girl inside of me is just like, but food doesn't give me sexual pleasure. That's bad. Oh my gosh, you know what I mean? And so, like, the process of unlearning and just like getting to understand what your sexuality is, and decolonizing that is really what it is. It's decolonizing sexuality so that it's a beautiful thing that can be enjoyed in different aspects of your life. I really appreciate that. Thanks for sharing. I do have an interesting question for you. What is the opposite of pleasure? Penda?
The opposite of pleasure. Oh my gosh. Well, I think to kind of go off with what Noor was saying about the power of like platonic pleasure, I think the more that you understand platonic pleasure or pleasure in any form that maybe is sexual or not sexual, the better that you can then choose only to interact with people or be in situations that bring you that pleasure. So the more that you understand the capacity of your pleasure, the more that you can dictate what pleasure comes into your life. But the opposite of pleasure, oh my gosh, I think I can.
You can take some time and think about it, but I definitely want to hear what your final answer is going to be.
Yes. I mean, I think physically, I've been in situations where my body just literally shuts down. And I think that has sometimes been an instance of just like, this is the opposite of like my body feeling safe, my body feeling at home, of feeling like capable of expressing any pleasure. But I'm going to think a little bit more and let the other folks answer.
Avian, do you have something to add to the what is the opposite of pleasure question?
Yeah, I mean, what immediately comes to mind for me is whatever doesn't make you feel good, you know? If something isn't making you feel good, it's not pleasurable. And I think that in a culture, in a society that throws so many unpleasurable things at us all of the damn time, I think a lot of us are accustomed to that feeling. We're accustomed to that hardening. Like when I immediately heard that question, I thought of what it feels like in my body to feel pleasure, which is my body softens, my body warms, my body feels more tender and more present to me. When the opposite of that would be my body hardens, my body is calloused, my body feels inaccessible to me, or my body, I take my body away from either people or the environment around me. It's a dissociative, I think, is what is coming for me when I think about what the opposite of pleasure is. And the kicker with that, as I was mentioning earlier, is that so many of us are accustomed to those feelings. Like we're accustomed to being dissociative. We're accustomed to being disconnected from our bodies. And so a lot of the clients that I've worked with in the past have been like, oh yeah, I totally have a relationship with pleasure. And then we get really deep in there and realize that like, no, actually we're not experiencing or exploring the full spectrum of our pleasure because we have so much trauma being hurled at us every single day because of the fact that like just living in the bodies that we have as non-white people, we are constantly thrown into these spaces where we don't feel safe. And so I think pleasure for me is about safety, and the opposite of pleasure would be unsafety. And so I would ask that people think about like the sensations that come up in their body when they feel pleasure, and also the sensations that come up in their body when they don't feel safe. I think that there's a lot of wisdom that our bodies hold for us. And you know, I think what we're doing here, which is understandable because we're on a panel, but like what we're doing here is we're thinking about pleasure. Like, what does pleasure like think? Like, how do I think about pleasure? What is it? Yeah, like, but what does it feel like? You know, like, can we tap into our body's wisdom and even ask ourselves that, our own selves that question? Like, what does the opposite of pleasure feel like in my body? I'm like really into tapping into the body's wisdom with questions like that.
Yes, thank you for that. I really love that disassociation because that makes the most sense. So just to plug a little bit over here, I am a 2021 TED Fellow, and one of the questions that they asked me during my interview was what the opposite of pleasure was, and I froze because I was like, my instinct was to say pain, but then again, I'm a kinkster and a masochist, and I love pain, so I was like, that can't be it because pain is great if given with consent. So like disassociating actually makes the most sense for me. The opposite of pleasure is like disassociating, and that can also be a trauma response. And one of the things that I'm curious to hear more about is being people of color and Black people specifically. You, Avion, spoke a little bit about our history and how, you know, things are thrown at us all the time just because of the color of our skin. Just this is the world that we live in right now. And my question is, how do you think, like, what has been the cultural impact for you and any feelings of shame around sexuality? Noor or Oloni, do you want to take that question first? Do you want to go first?
Sorry, it was cutting up a little bit. Can you just repeat the last bit? It was cutting up, yeah.
I'm so sorry about that.
That's fine.
To repeat, I was talking about like our lived experiences as Black people and people of color in the world and how things are constantly thrown at us. And the unlearning process is a long and the healing process is a constant ongoing process that we have to like take up. And I'm just wondering what has been like the cultural impact for you regarding feelings of shame or any form of trauma? And this might be a little bit of a trigger warning conversation for anybody who's listening, or for you guys, the panelists. So just a heads up for anybody, please feel free to share as much or as little as you want to.
Okay, so I think for me, it's looking back and realizing, I would say probably like microaggression that I faced, and I wasn't as aware as I am now. I would definitely say growing up, there were so many things when it came to just race or social issues that I was not aware of, or they were there and there weren't conversations around them. So I think now, because I'm so aware, I feel that I question more things, or that I feel like I might get triggered more easily. And this is because I think because of things like social media, everyone's sharing their personal, stories or their experiences. So you realize that certain things aren't just in your head. Those microaggressions that you second guessed were real. The things you look back at when you were growing up, you realize, I don't know, it kind of has an impact on your life as well, especially because it wasn't something that you could possibly address. When it comes to race, as a Black person, you're always thinking to yourself, oh, I don't want to offend. I don't want to do this. You always have to put someone else's feelings above yours. But I would say when it comes to cultural yeah, I think that would be it for me. Just feeling triggered and looking back. I'm always reliving experiences when I look back. And for example, my sister's my best friend, and I always have conversations with her like, oh my gosh, when this happened, I realized it was because of X, and when Y happened, I realized it was because of Z. And it is quite frustrating because you shouldn't, no one should ever have to live their life like that or think back at the microaggressions that they've ever had to face, or not even just macro as well. So I would say, yeah, those have been my points. Yeah.
Thank you. Penda, do you want to add something there?
I was just gonna.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Noor. Go ahead.
For me, I think it's not so much a race issue, because I've personally never lived outside of Egypt. I was born and raised in Egypt, and I've only lived in the UK for a very short period of time. But I can definitely say that culture has directly impacted my sexual life in general, especially because there's so much shame around pleasure, especially for women and girls. And parents, no matter how open-minded they are, they still feed into like it becomes kind of hereditary. They just like pass it on to their children without really thinking. And so I can't even say that I'm fully there yet. Like it's such a long road to get to a point where you feel truly sexually liberated. And I always tell this story, especially in closed panels and discussions, because it's never a story that I can share openly. I always used to feel a lot of shame with self-pleasure because I used to live with my parents, and it was like this taboo thing that I knew I shouldn't be doing because, yeah, it just felt wrong. And it wasn't until I was married, maybe 3 years into my marriage, where I still felt the same shame about wanting to give myself pleasure apart from receiving pleasure from my partner. And I confronted him, and I was like, I need to tell you something. And it kind of felt like I was talking to my dad. Like I masturbate. And his reaction was like, yeah, so what? I was like, what do you mean, so what? He's like, that's your thing. Like, I really, like, it's none of my business. I don't want to know what you do. It's not mine to tell you anything about. That's your relationship with your body. And that was definitely a turning point for me. Although I still tell people when I share the story that I am bummed that it still took a male figure to kind of give me the okay that it's fine for you to explore your body without feeling shame and without feeling guilty. But that definitely was something like the light bulb went on, and it was like, oh my God, I've been blocked. My body has been blocked for so many years, maybe a good 26, 27 years, because of how I was raised and the culture that I was raised in. We have 99% of women in Egypt are sexually harassed, and it's just everywhere. But at the same time, women aren't allowed to learn about their bodies. Women aren't allowed to ask about sex. Women need to basically look pretty and wait until you get married and hopefully bleed on your wedding night, because if you don't bleed, then you might get killed by your family for like honor killings. So it's like all of these stories are the stories that we're fed as little girls. And no wonder that we're blocked. No wonder that finding pleasure is difficult. And I don't know if this is the case in other countries where you're from, but this is the case here. And it's just so damn hard to do this work here, because on one end you have people who are so hungry for this information, but you have opposition that's really like smashing you day in, day out for trying to change the status quo.
Yeah.
Wow, Noor, thank you so much. I'm that so my idea of trauma and holding trauma, and it really does make sense to me what you said, Noor, about like your husband being the first person, is because there was not such a big thumb held down to men, cis men in our society, like there was to women. And for we always say that our parents the generation of our parents are not necessarily doing the work towards healing. They're still passing down the message of colonialists because they have been deeply colonized. Deeply colonized. And that I always say that the greatest con is the one where you don't know that you're being conned, and where it continues to happen, so much so that you get you get wrapped in it. And for me, that's what colonialism is. Being born into an African country and then learning the ways of the colonizer from your Black parents. And the releasing that trauma is just releasing everyday conversations that your parents had with you. So it isn't necessarily always about sexuality, even though it is somehow, you know, just like a lady never does this, close your legs when you sit, da da da. It's just these rules and restrictions and regulations that cis boys or men in the country were, little boys were not taught by their family. So it does make sense what you're saying about like your husband being the one, because he also, I guess, it's an interest. I really love that. I'm just like, I'm really loving this panel discussion right now.
Can I add something
Olani,
as well, please? If you don't mind.
I was just going to
have I
you.
frozen?
Please.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't. Okay, you froze a little bit, so I was just like, oh my god, have I frozen? No, I was gonna say, you know, even Noah's you know, point, it resonates with me in terms of, well, it's different, but in a sense, it's just having that conversation that you really feel like you shouldn't be having, but like, why not at the same time? It kind of reminds me of like when I was like 14 and my mum came across my condoms. And, you know, I would think, you know, normal response would be, okay, hurrah, she's having safe sex. And it was more like, I couldn't find them. I didn't know where they were. So me being British born, I honestly think if I was born in Nigeria, I wouldn't have had the guts to face my mum. But because I'm British, I've gone up to her and I've said, where are my condoms at 14 years old? And she's just like, you don't need them. And, you know, when you look back at that, and I think about it sometimes, I'm just like, you know, not to say that my mum's not sensible, because she is. She's going by what she, you know, she was someone that was Muslim, she's converted to Christianity, but she's always, you know, as far as she's concerned, sex is for procreating and for marriage. And, you know, the way she looks at it is there's no reason as to why a 14-year-old should have any interest in sexuality as a whole, regardless if it's safe, or regardless if she's educating herself or not. So I think that those are things that we also need to break, and hopefully continue educating young women. Because I mean, if my 14-year-old brought home condoms, I'd be like, okay, like, you know, I'd want to have a conversation about it, but you know, my family didn't see it that way. As the way they saw it was, you know, it goes back to what you said as well, Kaz, like, close your legs, this is not something that you need to do, or a woman should be covered up, etc., etc. And I guess it's those little things that we still have to unlearn. Because even when my mum sees me with the tiniest bit of cleavage out, for example, she's screaming her head off. Like, she's just like, oh my god, everyone can see your breasts. And to her, she's thinking your market's going to reduce. And I'm like, mummy, no one does this anymore, we're all sex positive now, like, that's not a thing anymore. Like, but it's weird, I'm 30 and I still have to, you know, explain to my mum why there's nothing wrong with a woman showing her cleavage, and how we shouldn't even be sexualizing it in the first place. So, yeah.
Thank you. I always say, especially with young sex workers of African descent, that we are the people that our ancestors have been waiting for. Yes. So we are the ones who have to teach our parents, because we're the ones who are currently in the healing process. We're currently in the unlearning process. So we are the ones our ancestors have been waiting for. Penda, can you talk a little bit about your Senegalese parent and what it was like from an African perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I'm also fasting like Noor, and it's not time to break my fast. So when you mentioned chocolate cake, I did feel a little, you know, a little upset, but I'm okay. But yes, I am Muslim, and I actually came from, my mother is Black American, my father is Senegalese. So I feel like I'm stuck in the middle of this. Like, my mom gave me the vibrator, but then my dad is Muslim. I have a very unconventional set of parents. But yeah, I think living in Senegal, obviously it's a very traditionally Muslim country, and you know, women are covered pretty much, you know, head to toe. And, you know, I do feel this is the first time in my life that I've actually lived in Senegal for an extended amount of time. So I feel like I'm constantly feeling judged in a way. And I know that this is my own identity crisis that I'm having, because people may or may not be judging me, but I feel really hypersensitive about how I carry myself in public and how I interact with other men and how I interact socially, or if you're out at a bar, even if you're not drinking, there's a lot of social and cultural norms, like Noor was saying, that are put on place of women's bodies. So I do feel like growing up, there was a lot of shame that even I didn't speak about. But, you know, similarly, if I had cleavage, like Olani said, you know, my dad would kind of come out with a scarf and like drape it around me and be like, okay, now you're ready to go. Now you can go see your friends, you know? But I feel like that carried on with me in my sexual relationships as in my early 20s and mid 20s. I just really didn't feel confident in asking for things sexually to my partners. I always felt kind of like I didn't deserve this, or I shouldn't speak up, or that, you know, it just never felt like that women really had the right to express what they wanted sexually. And I remember the first time that I was masturbating, it was actually like in my family's computer. And I would always kind of learn how to like erase the history on the computer, and was always, you know, kind of had one hand on my clit, but like my other ear was listening for when my parents would come home in the drive, would hear their car like coming in. I know to like shut down the computer, close all windows, erase all the history, you know. So you kind of find like these tricks of like, how can we're curious, we're naturally curious people. And it's not like we just wake up, you know, one day and you know, someone says like, oh, watch porn. But I feel like it's something within our body. We have a desire that needs some sort of tending to, even at age 14, like Alana, you said. So I feel like for me, this has been a beautiful experience living here in Senegal, but it also for me it's really about reimagining kind of what sexuality looks like. For me, I've always loved my thong bikinis, poom poom shorts, like being in New York, like that's my freedom of expression. And being here in Senegal, it's like, wow, I'm reimagining for me what sexuality looks like in a way that is more reserved and more traditional. And I'm finding, which is so beautiful, especially during Ramadan, is I have felt so sexy, more sexy, I think, being more covered up. And I know that, you know, Noor, you can probably relate to this, but yeah, it's been a really interesting time of finding more sensuality and more sexuality within myself that doesn't exactly translate to less clothing. But the shame is still there. I'm working on being more vocal, but I think in Senegal, it's interesting because you see a lot of sex work. For example, you see a lot of French people come to Senegal, and, you know, there's a lot of sex trafficking going on, but still here, same sex is criminalized. So I feel like we have a lot of work to do. And even in Africa, about half of the countries still criminalize same-sex relationships and same-sex marriage. So you see a lot of it is rooted in business and in the patriarchy and colonialism, because you're like, wow, these white people can come in and make money off of sex trafficking, but the inhabitants of this country can't freely express themselves how they want and the pleasure that they want. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And this is a country where religion is king. So it's not gonna, you know, change in a day or 100 years, or, you know, so the work needs to be done here, like in all of our spaces that we're working in, but I'm here because this work needs to be done.
Amen, Benda. Amen. And I'm a bit of an anomaly because as much as I did grow up, I was born and raised in Kenya. My parents were actually, interestingly, liberal-ish. They were quite liberal. I remember I was one of those kids who, like, my mom would say, your skirt is not short enough when I was leaving the house. It was like, and you know, my mom was just like one of those really cool hippies of the 70s who, like, I'm pretty sure my dad and mom used to go to swinger parties. My mom has told me little swinger stories here and there, but she always says stuff like, you know, when I was your age and I used to go out, we would wear hot pants and our ass would show. She's like, you express yourself. She was that kind of person. And I absolutely love that I grew up in a home where conversations about sex were they weren't taboo. We would joke about them and so on and so forth. But obviously, there's aspects of sexuality that are still very taboo. Like my parents, I'm queer, and my father is extremely homophobic, and he knows that I'm queer, but we just don't talk about it because otherwise it becomes a fight. But let's move on a little bit. I am curious in your journey, in the journey of the work that you have done and your journey of self-discovery and continuous learning of self. What are some of the things that you have learned or understand about consent, about boundaries when it comes to relationships with either partners or friends or family members, and also in the same breath with your sexuality? Can we hear from you, Evian?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I wish that I had learned when I was growing up, when I was given the piss poor sex education that I was given, was more about consent and boundaries. I think the sex education that I was given was like, you should only have sex when you're married. You should stay a virgin until you're married. Abstinence is best. But if you do have sex, you will get pregnant and your life is over. Like, there wasn't really conversations about like, here's what a sexuality is. Like, here's your personal sexual identity. And this is what it feels like when someone is crossing a boundary with your body, or you have the option to say no to sex. You have the option to request that things move at a slower pace. Like, those would have been so important for me to hear growing up. And unfortunately, I was given zero education about consent. So consent is something that I have learned in a visceral way in my adulthood, through a lot of trial and error. And one of the things that has been the biggest lessons that I've learned about consent and boundaries is that consent is not something, it's not like a one-time contract that you sign and then it's done. You know, I'm in a long-term relationship. Me and my partner have been together for almost 15 years. And so like, there's this understanding that I kind of got into that, like, oh, once you're married, you don't need to talk about consent. Like, y'all know each other, you've been together for a certain amount of time, like you sort of establish those rules and those boundaries. And the thing that I've learned within the last several years is that that's absolutely not true, that consent is a living document that you continue to add on to, that you continue to negotiate, that you continue to talk about. And in particular with me, someone who has experienced sexual trauma and who has been sexually violated, consent is a massive feature in my sexual relationship. Like, I need to know that my partner can understand and read my cues and my body to know, like, maybe before I even know that I'm having a triggered response or I'm having a trauma response. Like, we need to have these conversations about like, what does it look like when I am starting to dissociate? Or I need to know within myself, like, okay, I might have said yes to sex, but something's happening in my body and my body's like, oh, we need to take a step back. Like, I need to be able to discern what it feels like when it's definitely a yes, but my body needs some time to catch up, or I need to breathe into my belly in order for me to, you know, sort of, not push down, but just like smooth over any trauma responses that are kicking up because they're very habitual. So like, I think for me, consent is so much more than just saying yes or no to sex. Like, it is a constant conversation and a dialogue, not just with your partners, but with yourself. And I'm really interested in my work right now about looking at what does consent with yourself look like. And for me, that looks like not saying yes to sex that I would rather say no to, and being very clear on my boundary of like, because this is a habit that I've done for many, many years, thinking that, well, if your partner wants sex, you have to say yes. You have to sort of talk yourself into a yes if you don't want to, you know, have the sex. And so what I'm really focusing on right now is like, okay, what does it look like for me to practice consent with myself? What does it look like for me to take a pause and ask myself, hey, do I want to have sex right now? I don't know. Okay, let's see what steps we can take to potentially get that to a yes. That is maybe not like, let's jump right into sex. Maybe that's like, let's take a step back and like, let's make out, you know, or like let's dry hump and like, then have a check-in and ask like, okay, how does my body feel? Do I want to keep going? So like, it's for someone who wasn't given this kind of education about consent, this is a language and a practice that I am still learning, and I'm not very good at it. But I think the common theme within this conversation that we're all having today is that it's a journey, it's a process. And so, yeah, I just try to give myself a lot of grace and compassion, because these were things that were just not taught when I was coming into age.
And you know, that's where it's at, really, giving yourself grace and compassion, because a lot of the time we think that something like lessons like these are things that we learn overnight. But Avian, like you were saying earlier, something about like, well, I'm saying it different, but something about your body's DNA and like teaching your body to learn new things, and that's giving yourself permission, giving yourself grace, allowing yourself the time. So many conversations as well about consent in marriage, and marital sexual violence also happens, is a very common practice, and where people don't even think that it is something wrong, because nobody was told that it's something that you can say no to within the context of a marriage, and so on. What I have had the pleasure of being raised by so many beautiful, strong women in my life. And unfortunately, one of them, which I have only gotten to learn this much later on in life, used to say to me, you know, if you're with your partner or husband, very heteronormative, if you're with your husband and, you know, he wants to have sex and you don't, you have to, and she used to say, you have to do it for queen and country. Like that, like, you know, just close your eyes and get it done with. And, you know, it just made sense at the time. But then now it's like, but I don't want to know. But no, miss me with that bullshit. I'm sorry. I hope I'm allowed to cuss. Alani, you want to say something?
No, I was going to say, like, I think for a lot of people assume that consent starts and stops when it comes to sex. And I mean, I go to schools where I go to like schools for, well, secondary schools. And I feel like even younger than that, that's where consent should really be, you know, educated. And that's something that I was denied when I was in school. Like when we had conversations around sex from sex ed teachers or biology teachers, rather, there wasn't that conversation. And I really wish there was, because again, when I look back at so many things, I'm just like, that was a violation. That should not have happened. This was inappropriate. That person should have really have been suspended for what they did to you. And you don't realize that because, again, there's that lack of education. So when I'm talking about kids, I'm talking even babies, you know, when we're talking to little babies, we should really tell them, you know, if you don't want to hug auntie, you don't have to. If you don't want to give uncle a kiss on the cheek, you don't need to. You're perfectly within your right. Like that, if the day I have a kid, I know that's definitely going to be something I'll be doing. And when I talk about children in schools, I'm talking about kids who pull on the bra straps of girls, or girls who force guys to give them a hug when they're not in the mood to, or guys who have pulled up the school skirt of girls. Like these are things that are still very rampant in like in schoolyards, or do you know what I mean, or playgrounds. And when I was in school, I was one of those people, like, you know, I've had a boy pull on my bra strap or play with my skirt. And now when I think about it, I'm just like, oh my God, that is insane, because that could not happen today. A guy could not just walk up to me randomly on the road and do that. That would be harassment, and I'd have to file a police report. And when we look at club culture, for example, when we're going into clubs, you know, there's been times I remember I wore a red skirt and I got violated by a guy, and I kept blaming myself. I was just like, I shouldn't have worn this, or I shouldn't have done that. And there shouldn't be that either. There should be a club culture where we all understand that even when you want to dance with a girl, you still need to ask for her permission. You're not going to go behind her and start slowly grinding and hoping that she says yes, or that her friend gives her the nod. You should really communicate with the person that you're dancing with. And these are conversations that we're not having, and that we need to have a lot more, because then again, when you're going from kids to school to university, which I just want to give my own trigger warning in case I do trigger anyone. So I am talking about sexual violence. So I just want to give that trigger warning now in case anyone wants to quickly mute. So when I talk about sexual violence, when we're talking about universities, etc., that's a place where we know that a lot of boys and girls do not understand the meaning of consent when it comes to sex. And I feel like if that education was given to people when they were a lot younger, we wouldn't be stuck in that predicament where people are second guessing if, were they wrong? Should they have spoken up? Is him removing the condom, is that identified as like sexual abuse, which it is, especially if you haven't consented to it? So there's so many conversations we need to have around it. And when I talk about consent with myself, I always say that, consent is sexy. Of course, it's mandatory above all. Like that's just it. But it can be sexy as well. And when I talk about it being sexy, I'm talking about conversations between the sheets that you're having with a partner that you're into. Making sure that you're checking in along the way. Can I do this to you? Can I do that? Would you like me to stop? Should I continue? Are you enjoying it when I, rub you like this? Or whatever it is that you're into sexually, that is still a form of consent. And it is sexy as well, because you've got women and guys who have no clue what they're doing to each other sometimes. And that's because they're not really communicating between the sheets. And when you communicate, that can be a big turn on. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to say.
Thank you. We're actually going to soon be going into a quiz, which I'm super excited about. But before we do that, I just wanted to add on to what you were saying, Aloni. And a lot of the time, and even for the people listening who are of diverse sexualities, a lot of the time when we discuss consent, we always obviously heteronormatively and also based on our lived experiences, just assume that a lot of these things are happening with people of opposite genders or of different genders. And sometimes I find that there's a lot of young boys who are getting harassed by other boys, and then they won't talk about that because they don't think that that's a violation of their consent or of their boundaries. And and the shame that is affiliated with bullying or any kind of sexual harassment with somebody who's of the same gender, and you're young and growing up in a household where people are telling you, you need to be strong, you need to be a man, and all of these gender norms that are placed on people. And even with I was one of the girls that was the least popular in prep school, and I used to always get I was constantly even the way the boys would come in and pull up your skirt, the girls would do the same thing. They would, so that the boys could come and grab my ass, for example. And these are things that we always tend to blame people of different genders. But then at the same time, we have to understand that a violation of our boundaries or our consent is our boundaries and our consent, which means it doesn't matter who you are, you're not allowed to violate my space. And if I do say no, it goes across the board. So sometimes we also just need to reinforce younger people that these things happen across the board, regardless of what gender you are.
And Kaz, with what you just said, it was, when we're talking about consent, it does sound a bit heteronormative. I would definitely say if anyone hasn't watched it, please watch Michaela Cole's
oh my gosh,
I May Destroy
You.
Brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And what I love about it is that it shows you about boundaries in every sort of just around different sexualities. You different characters who were gay, who lied about their sexuality, who lied about their arrangement. So it just shows you about the lines that people like to say are blurred, but they're really not, especially if you know what the intent is. If your intent is to betray or to lie, then that's usually, that tells you, where everything stands. So yeah, I would definitely say watch I May Destroy You. It's amazing, and it definitely educates you on real life stories that happen every day, probably not even spoken about. I think heterosexual conversations are the ones that happen the most, but that really does give you different point of views.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
I'm sorry, I want to jump in because Evian and I actually worked together on I May Destroy You with HBO, and we have an incredible IG live on both of our IG pages talking about the politics of pleasure and consent and all of those good things. But the show is amazing. But that's the first project we worked together on.
That's how we met.
Yes.
Okay, so really quickly, Penda and Avian, could you just share what your Instagram handles are so people can go and catch your lives?
Yeah, mine is at Evian Whitney. So my name just without the apostrophe, Evian.Whitney.
Thank you. Penda?
Yes, I just changed my name underneath, but it's I'm Proho, IMPROHOE, and I'll add my personal one as well.
Okay, thank you. And actually, while we're here, Oloni and Noor, do you guys want to share your social media handles so that people can follow you?
Yeah, so mine is at This Is Mother Being.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mine is at Oloni on all socials.
Okay, and if you want to follow me and all of the sex education work I'm doing, I'm at The Spread Pod. Okay, so you guys ready? We're gonna do a quiz. Oh man, I'm so excited. Okay. I have 11 true or false questions. I want you guys to unmute your microphones because I want you guys to just yell the answer. Okay. Question number 1. The clitoris is about the size of a pea. True or false?
False.
Yeah, definitely
false.
Definitely
False.
Yeah. Thank you. The female clitoris, actually, we should not call it the female clitoris. The clitoris, because we need to be inclusive. The clitoris is about the size of a medium zucchini or a courgette, for those who are in the UK.
And it has more nerve endings than a penis, can I just add, please? Which shows that we are the higher being.
Yeah.
And yes, and also is the only organ that is created entirely
just for pleasure.
Yes. Yes. Okay. The second question is really funny. The first piece of advice that my mother ever gave me, sex advice, was the ugliest thing in the world is a naked man with socks on. So question number 2, wearing socks during sex increases the chances of orgasm.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm gonna say true. I'm gonna say
false only because I hate being in the bed with socks on.
Yeah, I hate it as well.
So according, it's true.
I figured, yeah.
According to a study by University of I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that. Plus, I'm a little dyslexic. In the Netherlands, couples were 30% more likely to orgasm with warmer feet. That feels
That's
like
what I was thinking.
It feels like a cold weather problem.
Yeah,
I think cold countries.
I yeah, I see that.
Yeah. Question number 3. Lust and love activate the same part of the brain.
Yes, true.
Yeah, I was gonna say true.
True.
Why not? I know I've definitely confused the two.
That's your ego. That's your ego.
True.
Actually,
that's
it's false.
It's false.
Yes. They activate 2 separate parts of the brain. And according to the study, lust triggers parts of the brain that controls pleasurable feelings associated with sex and food, but love triggers part of the brain associated with habits.
Okay.
Okay.
Wait,
that's
what?
Weird.
Wait, love triggers what? What's the
love triggers the parts of the brain that is associated with habits.
Okay. Huh.
Yes.
Interesting.
Right?
Wow. Who would have thought?
Question number 4. Natural vaginal lubricant contains a substance called squalene, which is also found in the liver of sharks. I'm going to repeat that. Natural vaginal lubricant contains a substance called squalene, which is also found in the liver of sharks. True or false?
I'm gonna say false.
I
would say false, but you know, it might be true because I feel like then we use water lubricants.
Water-based lubricants.
Yeah. I'm gonna say true just because everyone else said false.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're right, Penda. It is true.
I've never heard this before.
No way.
People were trying to throw us off, so I was just like, nah.
Yo, I use a face cream that has squalene in it.
Exactly.
Just like get my pussy juice.
Yeah,
exactly. So it's also been used in skincare products and as an antioxidant. Although many companies have shifted away from using the shark-derived squalene in their products, utilizing plant-based sources now.
Wow.
I mean, but if that doesn't prove that like all that we ever need in this world is already of the earth, I don't know what else.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
And my pussy is plant based, so I'm just saying. Question number 5. The clitoris has 5,000 nerve endings. True or false?
False.
False.
Yes. 8,000.
8,000.
Yes.
Put some respect on my clitoris.
Yes.
The clitoris has more nerve endings, you had said this, than your tongue and your fingertips, and the penis only has 4,000.
Womp womp.
Question number 9. Orgasming can alleviate pain.
True.
Yes, true. Certain brain areas light up in response to both pain and pleasure. So it is possible that when they're responding to pleasure signals, they may be able to inhibit pain sensations.
Yeah. Honestly, during my period, like masturbating and giving myself orgasm is the best remedy for period cramps.
Honestly, it gets
for
really
myself personally.
That's amazing. Wonders.
There you go, Oloni, primrose tea and an orgasm.
Exactly, there we go.
An orgasm a day in your primrose
and I'm good
oil.
to go.
You got it.
Yes.
Exactly.
And Evian, I know that you're a big a big champion for marijuana and as a pain pain aid, right?
Yeah. CBD is really good, can be really good for alleviating period pain. I mean, I think a lot of CBDs that we're seeing right now are like CBD lubes are for sex, but I actually think that a lot of the CBD lubes out there can also be used for like pelvic pain, period pain, etc. So
yeah, be sure to follow them on their Instagram page because they're constantly putting out that content. So I'm here for this. Question number 7. Sex can cause memory loss. Oh, true or false?
I want to say it's true. I don't know why.
I want to say it's true only
maybe
because
short
of TV. Maybe short term, because I feel like you're in romantic comedies. It's always like the guy forgets what he said during orgasm or something, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I have a problem. I almost always forget the sex. And I've always thought that it was a trauma response, which I'm pretty sure plays a big part in it. But then this makes a lot of sense too. I mean, yesterday, one of my partners was just like, do you remember the time we did this and this and this? I'm like, no, but it sounds like something that I would do. So a little known condition called global transient amnesia affects fewer than 7 people in every 100,000, causing a sudden but temporary loss of memory.
Okay.
A temporary memory loss can be triggered by a number of stimulating events, including jumping into freezing water, knocking your head, medical procedures, and incredible sex.
Wow.
I'm going to share this with my partners.
Yes,
so
this means you're blessed. Exactly. Yeah. You're blessed, guys.
Oh, absolutely. Lord Jesus. Number 9. Sex burns 3 to 4 calories per minute.
How many?
3 to 4 calories per minute.
A minute?
Yes.
A minute?
I remember it was a small amount of calories per 20
I think that's about right.
Yeah, I was going to say, why not?
Okay, that is true. Several studies published in the last few years have discussed sex and calorie expenditure. One of them, from the University of Quebec at Montreal, studied 21 heterosexual couples in their early 20s and deduced that. Results showed that men burn 101 calories, i.e. 4.2 calories per minute, on average during the 24-minute session, and women burnt 69 calories. You see, the problem is that they were doing heterosexual studies.
Yeah.
Women would have burnt more calories.
We would have.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just changing my name so that y'all can also see my Instagram handle. Question number 10. If you can conceive if you're pregnant.
You can
True.
I
continue.
think that's true, but it's
Yeah,
very
true.
rare.
Very
Yeah,
rare.
I was going to say
Very
that.
rare.
I've read stories.
Okay.
Very rare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Conceiving while pregnant is extremely rare. It's an
Yes.
extremely rare biological event called a superfetation. It occurs when two separate fertilizations happen in the same cycle. Back in 2009, sorry, in an odd phenomenon known as superfetation, a pregnant woman releases an egg a few weeks into her pregnancy. The second egg is fertilized, and the person is then pregnant with two babies simultaneously. Don't confuse this with oh my gosh, I can't read these big words. I'm dyslexic. Super fecundation, when two eggs released during the same cycle are fertilized at separate times. Okay.
Got it.
And this is the final question for today. Condoms are 99.9% effective at preventing pregnancy and STI transmission. True or false?
False.
False.
I think that's
I think
false.
a little
I don't
less
think
than
it's
that.
high. Yeah.
It's lower than that.
You are right. False. If used correctly, condoms are 98.
98. Yeah.
Yeah.
percent effective at protecting against pregnancy and most STIs like chlamydia and gonorrhea. So make sure you get yourselves checked regularly, as many STIs have no symptoms at all and perhaps have a double contraceptive method. And that's it for our quiz.
Yay.
Yay.
And
I definitely learned.
we do have a couple of questions from the audience that I would like you guys to choose that came from our discussions earlier. So if you can help some of our audience members answer these questions, this would be really great. So we're going to go into a quick Q&A from you guys. Oloni, I'm not sure if you can stay or if you have to go.
I'll chill. That's cool.
That's the right answer. Okay, so let's see. Our first question. When was the moment you were able to truly be comfortable in your body and sexuality? Shall we start with you, Oloni?
Yeah, sure. I would say 20 something, in my mid 20s. And that's because I feel like I was with my partner for quite some time. I mean, if it was with another person, I would definitely say it was with my relationship in my 20s. But if it was just by myself, feeling comfortable in my sexuality, I would definitely say, again, my early 20s actually. And that was because I was truly able to tap into my sexuality and understanding my body and getting to know myself and realizing that sexuality wasn't just for straight men, as we'd like to believe, or some would like to believe, and that, I don't know, I just always felt like they were the main focal point. Like sexuality was never really for women, let alone women who look like me. And I wasn't really able to embrace that properly till my 20s. And that's because of my own, exploration that I did on my own and being with my partner who was sexually compatible with me, which I think is important, especially when you're discovering yourself. If you're trying to discover yourself with other people, you need to make sure that they're sexually compatible with you. Did I answer that? I'm not sure. I would definitely say it all started, probably in my early 20s when I was just understanding my body in terms of like buying vibrators. I used to work in a sex store in my early 20s as well. And I remember people would come into the store and my behavior was always different. And when I say their behavior was different, I mean that they came in giggling or they were nervous. They were shy. They didn't understand what the point of a sex toy was if they were there, because they might have been there with their friends. So they were probably just window shopping. But my response, I always had a straight face, because to me, like, sex wasn't really a big deal. And I realized that was because I was so comfortable and also confident within my sexuality that I was able to sell these enormous, giant, you know, dildos or rabbits to like complete strangers. And I noticed that that was definitely part of my sexuality, even being able to just work in a sex store. And again, having a partner who really understood me and was on the same wavelength as me when it came to sex. And we were very trusting with each other as well, which I really love, even though we're not together anymore. Like, I like the fact that I was able to experience such a beautiful sexual relationship with that person.
Thanks for sharing that. I feel like people of African diaspora who grew up in the Western world have had such a greater advantage over the Africans that grew up in Africa. You know, because like because
they tweet me. I've got so many Nigerian followers, and I don't get why they follow me sometimes, because I feel like part of it is because they're curious, but the other part, I don't know what the other part is actually. I tell a lie, because if I say something to do with sexuality, they're usually screaming at me, and I'm just like, why are you following me? You know what I talk about. But I feel like a part of them does secretly enjoy the education, or they do enjoy the conversation of what strangers are getting up to sexually. So I don't feel like they have that for themselves. I don't think they celebrate their own sexuality the way I'd love them to. But
so living vicariously through your
page.
Basically.
But that's another conversation.
Okay, Noor, this question is for you. Do you sometimes feel scared doing what you do in Egypt?
Oh my God, 100% yes. All the time, of course. We live in a country that does not have freedom of expression at all. And talking about sex and sexuality is an extremely taboo topic. It's not even something that's tackled by the government. There are no curriculums in school in place for this. So it's kind of like this thing that like exists, but also we're not supposed to be talking about. And the fact that I'm here on social media being very loud about us having to debunk these myths, of us having to talk about trigger warning, FGM, of us having to talk about boundaries and consent, of us having to talk about, again, trigger warning, especially marital rape, because it's something that's very, very, very common in Egypt, especially that there's no, so it's not criminalized if it happens within a marriage. So the guy doesn't end up going to jail because the government or the justice system doesn't believe that there is such thing as marital rape. So for us to be talking about all of these issues, obviously there's so much that we can't tackle. Like someone was saying, like I think Penda was saying that in Senegal, it's same-sex relationships are illegal and punishable by law. The same thing is in Egypt as well. And so we have an LGBTQ plus community in Egypt that don't have any resources that are relatable. And when they ask us questions, we can never share the answers openly, but we always make it a point to message the individual and explain, like, for our safety, to be able to continue doing this work, we're more than happy to offer you all the advice that you need, but privately, because once we go public and show that we support the LGBTQ plus community, next day I'll be in jail, like no questions asked. So of course it's scary. I'm always wondering, like, when the shoe's gonna drop. I don't know if that's the right expression. Like, when's the day gonna come when the government decides, okay, we need to shut this woman up? And it's not something that feels very far off. Like, it's not gonna be, I don't think anyone would be shocked if I were to be interrogated or arrested for basically like changing the way women think and changing the way women feel about their bodies and changing the culture and the norms. I think it's very, very scary for such a patriarchal society such as Egypt or the MENA region in general. So yeah, definitely scared all the time, but I'm kind of in it. So I keep telling myself, like, I'm already doing the work. I might as well do it. Like, khalas, that's what we say in Egypt. Like,
go hard or go home.
Exactly.
I know we're short on time, Kath, but can I just add also like a
Sure.
interesting story. Someone here in Senegal who created a short film on gender roles, and they had the entire film, a man was portraying the gender roles of a woman and a woman vice versa. And actually the Senegalese government told him that he had to take it down, otherwise he would go to prison. And so like this was 4 or 5 years ago that he had to remove the content, even though it made its rounds in film festivals and was like getting so much buzz. But just recently he put the film back up, and I thought it was just so brave, because these are the conversations that we need to be having. But it's also like a matter of like his life that he's risking. But I think it's beautiful that there are people who are doing the work like you, Noor, and especially in this society where men in Senegal can have 4 wives, but then like there are just so many elements that you're navigating while trying to be progressive and have different conversations. But
yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. So yes, we are running out of time. I feel like saying I want to take the liberty because this is the last panel of the festival, but we're just going to answer 2 more questions real quickly. One of them is super quick. Maybe Avian, you can help. What period underwear do you recommend?
Oh my goodness, there's so many, but I really love this period brand called Aisle, Aisle. I like them because I know that there are a lot of period underwear brands out there that, I don't know, they have like a lot of lace, and I'm not really a fan of lace in my period underwear. Like I want them to be utilitarian. I want them to stop the leaks. I want them to just like get her done, you know? So I like Aisle because it's just very simple. They have different cuts. And in particular, what I like is they have a boxer brief cut, which I just like, I wear boxer briefs anyway. Like I actually stole my husband's boxer briefs for me to bleed in because it was just, I don't know, they're just really comfortable. So yeah, I recommend Aisle. They're great.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Our last question, and I guess first person to put their hand up can answer it. My Caribbean American dad often says things that are offensive to women openly. Recently, he said something misogynistic in front of me. And because I've been doing work on myself and my sexuality in my adulthood, I felt super emotional and disappointed. I love my dad and want our relationship to flourish, but comments like that don't make me feel safe and loved. How do I confront him about this? I really related to what was said about mindsets being hereditary. How do I speak to my younger sibling? Anyone? Come on, guys.
Well, I'll just add what came up for me is that I don't think that mindsets are hereditary. I think when we say hereditary, that denotes that like upon birth, like without you even trying or being influenced, like you're homophobic, which is not true. Those sorts of ideas and belief systems are impressed upon us. They're taught. So I don't want anyone to think that like, oh, my dad is homophobic, so that means that I'm going to be homophobic too. Like you have the option to believe something else. You have the option to not be ignorant, you know?
Yeah, thanks for that. I actually really relate to this question because my father is very similar in that sense. And I feel like every time we're together, I have to sort of manage the room because sometimes he could yell at like a server, or, you know, he's just like, I mean, I really want to say a typical African dad, but he is a myriad of different things, but I completely relate to that. And what I found is, and I think this is important because earlier we spoke about consent and boundaries. And a lot of the time you just need to have a conversation with whoever it is that you're allowing into your space or allowing a part of your energy, for them to know that this is not something that I stand for. And even if it means giving them what the consequences of their actions would be. If this is a kind of person that you're going to be around me, then you're not the person, regardless of whether you're my father. I don't want to be spending time with you because I find that your actions are hurtful to people. And I think allowing him to understand where you're coming from is allowing him also to understand like the beginning of you setting boundaries. And one of the conversations that you can have with your younger siblings is for them to set boundaries as well. sometimes I find like if I am with my dad, he's very aware of my boundaries and how I don't like this. But every time I am around him and he does yell or he does say something misogynistic, I find that I attack back. And then he always does this thing where he's like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I didn't mean to. But I don't want it to get to that because I don't feel like that's the right way to approach it. But it just feels like with people like this, once you start with a like boundary conversation, if you don't respect my boundaries, then that's what's going to be. I'm gonna yell back, like, don't talk to her like that, don't say things like that in public, don't do that, you know what I mean? So that would be my opinion. Does anyone else have something that they want to add to that? Nope. Okay, well then, in wrapping up, first of all, I just want to say thank y'all. The final question to each and every one of you, I want you to tell me what your love language is. Noor? Oh, Aloni, go first.
I was
love language.
So mine is, I used to say that mine was words of affirmation, but I decided that that was a lie, because what that allows is that I'm accepting that men and women can lie to me when they're pursuing me. So it definitely has to be, I've changed it. What did I change it to? It was definitely, so what's the one? Acts of service. It's definitely acts of service. Acts of service is a very big thing for me, and not just from romantic relationships, all sorts of relationships. Yeah, that would definitely be acts of service.
Okay. Noor?
I can't really remember, but I think it was something like acts of service, and also gift giving, if that's a thing, like showing your affection with gifts, and then maybe physical touch. I thought, like Oloni, I thought it was words and like affirmations. And then I quickly realized, because I married someone who is a man of very few words, but a man of acts of service only. And I realized that was the thing for me, rather than those just like talk sweet and that's it.
Okay. Penda?
Well, there must be something in the water, because I'm the same, that I used to think it was words of affirmation. However, those words mean nothing if there are no actions. So my love language is definitely quality time as well as acts of service.
Wow. Evian?
Mine is quality time as well as physical touch.
Thanks. I was actually going to say, it's so interesting that nobody has said physical touch yet. My primary love language is physical touch, and my secondary one is quality time. And I feel like quality time and physical touch kind of go hand in hand. Oh, thank you guys so much for joining us. Everybody who's in the audience, thank you so much for taking time to spend time with us. I hope you learned stuff. Everybody's Instagram handle is on their, like, underneath their name tag. So please be sure to follow everybody. There's definitely something to learn from everybody. And thank you guys so much for being a part of this panel discussion. This has been so much fun for me. I was so nervous in the beginning, but now I'm just like, oh my gosh, can we have another hour, please?
You did great. You were a great host, Kaz.
Yes, and it was so fun.
Amazing. You were great.
Super fun.
Thank you.
You're amazing.
Thank you so much. And of course, a really big thank you to Vista Bank for sponsoring this festival. It has been a wonderful couple of days. And before we leave, actually, the last thing that is going to happen for the festival is we're going to have some words of thanks, and I guess a thank you to our sponsors from the CEO of AMAKA, who is Adora Orama. I hope I pronounced your name right. Adora Orama. And that's kind of it. If you guys wouldn't mind just holding back for a little bit after this. But for now, I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.